Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Katie Covey-Spanier, and I'm the Director of Public Engagement and Learning here at the Weisman Art Museum. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon and for sharing space with us. The Weisman Art Museum is built on the traditional and contemporary homelands of the Dakota people. It's important that we acknowledge the peoples whose land we live, learn, and work as we seek to improve and strengthen our relations with tribal nations. This land acknowledgement is a part of the long and complex process of reconciling with the colonial legacy of our institution. With this acknowledgement and our ongoing work with the repatriation of the members' cultural materials and our Truth and Repair project, we state our commitment to this process. WAM would like to thank Ameriprise Financial, the Art and Martha Kemmer Fund of HRK Foundation, the KHR McNeely Family Fund, thanks to Kevin, Rosemary, and Hannah Rose McNeely, as well as individuals like you who contribute to the annual fund. If you feel inspired by today's program, please consider making a gift that's right for you by scanning the QR code in the lobby as you leave. We'll be recording today's event and will be posted to the museum's YouTube channel soon. After the talk, we'd love to hear from you during the question and answer period. Please raise your hand and wait for the microphone. We encourage you to ask questions rather than to make statements to ensure that we have a meaningful and productive discussion for everyone. Our program today is presented in conversation with our feature exhibition, Kara Walker, Harper's Pictorial History of the Civil War, Annotated. This exhibition, curated by Lisa Williams of the New Britain Museum of American Art and the Museum Box, presents Walker's print portfolio by the same name. This suite of 15 large-scale prints considers experiences of racism and violence against African Americans that were absent or only alluded to in dominant historical representations of the Civil War. In today's keynote lecture, Kara Walker, Winslow Homer, Blackness, and AI considers the ongoing engagement with Harper's weekly illustrations made by Winslow Homer and other artists during the Civil War by contemporary artists like Kara Walker, who have sought to transform them, and by everyday art lovers who search for historical images of African Americans to add to their home decor. It will explore the insight these contested historical images might give us into the desires of contemporary art audiences in a world in which artificial intelligence is radically altering the terrain of art creation and consumption. And now, I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker, Professor Gwendolyn DuBois Shaw. DuBois Shaw is the class of 1940 bicentennial term professor in the Department of Art History and the inaugural faculty director of the Arthur Ross Gallery at the University of Pennsylvania. Her research focuses on portraiture and issues of representation with an emphasis on construction of race, class, gender, and sexuality in the American context. She has previously served on the faculty of Harvard University as the Director of Research, Publications, and Scholarly Programs at the Smithsonian's National Portrait Gallery. In addition to her books, The Art of Remembering, Essays on African American Art and History, Seeing the Unspeakable, The Art of Kara Walker, and First Ladies of the United States, People Picturing African Americans in the 19th Century, represent 200 years of African American art at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, and I Dream a World, selections from Brian Lenker's portraits of remarkable Black women at the National Portrait Gallery. Please join me in welcoming Professor DuBois Shaw to the stage.
Holy cow, I had no idea. Who is this Gwendolyn Shaw? She's amazing. Thank you so much for having me here. Do I need to touch the... here we go. It's great to be here. I have enjoyed the morning and the afternoon, and Monkey Bear was amazing. And the installation is beautiful. Your museum is fantastic. Right back here? Is that
Little feedback.
maybe there? Is that okay? Yeah? Okay, great. So I'm going to read this paper. This is work in progress for me. I've been working on this for about 2 years. Super busy the last year. So yeah, it's funny when you work on issues of technology. They're like, it already feels kind of outdated. So apologies if it's like so last year. In 2005, Carol Walker completed a portfolio of 15 lithographs that featured her signature black silhouetted form superimposed over mass media illustrations selected from the 1866 publication Harper's Pictorial History of the Civil War. The artist titled this work of appropriation and adaptation, Harper's Pictorial History of the Civil War, Annotated, in reference to the series' direct engagement with a specific historical construct that had been produced by the dominant organ of a recolonizing force. With a circulation that reached nearly 500,000 by the end of the Civil War in 1865, the illustrated magazine Harper's Weekly was one of the most popular sources of news amongst northern pro-Union audiences. The magazine supplied readers on the home front with stories and wood engravings that reproduced images of battle and daily life amongst the troops by illustrators such as Winslow Homer and Thomas Nast. Following the end of the conflict, the magazine's editors, Alfred H. Guernsey and Henry M. Alden, carefully selected articles and images from back issues to create a 2-volume history that both expanded upon and reframed what had come before. In a conciliatory move to shed the pro-Union, anti-slavery position that had characterized the magazine during the war, Guernsey and Alden chose 2 titles for the new publication: Harper's Pictorial History of the Civil War and Harper's Pictorial History of the Great Rebellion. However, in both volumes, Guernsey and Alden purposely minimized the Black presence and participation in the war as their reporters and illustrators had recorded it. They chose not to republish most of the hundreds of illustrations of the enslaved, the freed, and the freeborn African-descended people who had originally been included in the magazine. In so doing, the editors recast the conflict as a disagreement over states' rights and a struggle for economic dominance between white men, some who were protecting the livelihoods of planters in an agrarian South, and others representing the interests of an industrial North that was struggling to absorb waves of European immigration. In its recognition of the recolonizing action that was at the heart of the source material for Harper's Pictorial History of the Civil War, Annotated, reflects Walker's ongoing artistic practice of remembering the disremembered parts of the 19th century American visual culture. As her Black figures, who may also be read as racially Black figures, engage in provocative and oblique dramas, they make visible to us the continuing impact of racism and perceptions of racial difference on the way that factual events are recorded in both words and images. Walker's work also helps viewers to draw a direct line between the historical demonization and degradation of Black people that flourished during the century between the era of the Civil War and Reconstruction, the civil rights and Black power movements, to the contemporary era of Black Lives Matter and calls to defund the police. Quote, "I'm interested in the fact of slavery's influence on the American system," Walker related in an interview, "and the power of its influence over the American imagination," close quote. If the writing of history is about certitude in facts, if it is about assembling a chronology, the recording of things that happened and the delineation of the things that were, it is about providing information and facts to a reader in a way that fixes an event or series of events in time so that they may be known and understood. Then Harper's Pictorial History of the Civil War, Annotated, serves as a profound remediation of the act of factual exclusion performed by the original volume's purposeful elision of the Black presence in the Civil War. It is also representative of Walker's provocative insertion of Black figures, both real and imagined, into the historical image worlds that were created in the immediate aftermath of the devastating national reckoning over slavery and the political union that was the American Civil War. The kind of remembering that Walker achieves here is one that operates from the margins of history. It is unfixed and uncertain. It seeks to elucidate history, but it does not determine its course or alter its interpretation. It elucidates instead. The remembering of history, as practiced by artists like Walker, is about the expansion and explanation of narrative by bringing facts that have been purposely set aside and actively ignored, that which has been disremembered. Like critical fabulation, it finds the given boundaries of what was to be insufficient, and by offering more, it asks us to imagine, what if? In this way, the intellectual embracing of the purposefully disremembered and the consciously neglected expands the possibilities of history by acknowledging the existence of multiple forms of knowledge and multiple ways of understanding an event or interpreting an object. Embracing remembering allows for interpretation and the creation of a narrative to be both speculative and open-ended. It is also about flavoring and augmenting rather than revising or repositioning. To embrace remembered art history is to think beyond canonical interpretations of works of art or objects of material and visual culture to ask, what else did we once know that has now been disremembered? These days, however, the past we see may no longer actually be the past that was, as artificial intelligence gives us the power to rememory fantasies and augment pseudo-realities. Fakery is a big part of our personal and our professional lives. In the academy, we encounter it in ChatGPT-assisted essays, made for us by students with rapidly improving and self-teaching artificial intelligence, and in the computer-generated imagery that we encounter in our Google searches. And of course, it is all over the social media we consume when we are trying to take a break from that work. One day last fall, while I was scrolling through my Instagram feed, I encountered this fascinating image of a well-dressed Black couple flossing in a wide lapel blue suit with bow tie and a red mini dress, scarf, and audacious sun hat. It had been posted by Imani Roach, a Harvard-trained specialist in African art who is now the director of the Brin Center for African Art at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. In her commentary beneath the image, Roach called it out as a stealthy insertion of computer-generated fakery that had insinuated itself into the feeds of numerous social media users. She included close-ups of the AI tells that appeared within the image, including the strange design on the female figure's dress and the black cut and paste halos around the male figure's shoulders. She also included the text string prompt that had produced it. Quote, a black couple on Michigan Avenue, Chicago, 1975, close quote. Like myself, Roach is a follower of social media profiles like Fashioning the Self and Black Archives that share historic studio photographs and vernacular snapshots of Black people living their lives from the 1840s to the present day. These profiles offer a daily supply of historical images of Black people that are most often also taken by Black people and historically circulated within Black domestic contexts. They provide scholars and lovers of Black visual culture a window onto Black lives as they were lived through time and across the country. Fashioning the Self is maintained by Jonathan Square, a professor at Parsons, and Black Archives is maintained by the artist Renata Charlize. On her website, blackarchives.co, Charlize explains her project as, quote, an evolving visual exploration that provides a dynamic accessibility to a Black past, present, and future. It examines the nuance of Black life, alive and ever vibrant to both the everyday and iconic, providing insight and inspiration to those seeking to understand the legacies that preceded their own, close quote. Black Archives has become a phenomenon. Today it comprises several social media feeds, a website, and has been monetized in the form of a book, a photographic celebration of life, from your phone to your coffee table. This is the image that, quote, a black couple on Michigan Avenue, Chicago, 1975, was sliding into. In addition to the image in question, Imani Roach posted redacted screenshots of the comments made by some of the nearly 50,000 people who had taken the time to hit the like button when they encountered it in their feeds. From nostalgic musings to heart-eyed smiling faces, "Come on, my people, such a sight to see," and black power fists, "Beautiful couple." Viewers were openly reveling in the black joy of seeing an image that presented black love, black aesthetics, and a record of black communal history that has been invisible beyond the hyperlocal site of the family album. In her own commentary, Roach wrote, "Are other black folks' algorithms increasingly feeding them unmarked and largely unclocked AI imagery of this particular flavor? As a lifelong black self-representation, a student of black self-representation, and of the seductive appeal of photographs, as a cultural historian attentive to the role of archives and other repositories of primary information in shaping both the past and the future, I am so concerned about this trend as I am about AI in general. What work are images like this doing for us? What desires do they tap into? Mind you, this appears on a page dedicated to heterosexual romantic black love with more than 1 million followers. It received 1 to 2 orders of magnitude more engagement than any of the hundreds of other posts of actual black couples. Nowhere in the caption or the comments is the authenticity called into question. The questions posed by Roach, what are the images like this doing for us? What desires do they tap into? Are ones that I would like to muse on with you today as I share with you this work that I've been doing on the intersection of entrepreneurial commercial art sales and AI-generated images that fake the presence of African American subjects in 19th century American art. A few years ago, I had the opportunity to explore the ways that blackness was used by the 19th century American painter Winslow Homer in the paintings that he made in the 1870s. In my essay in the exhibition catalog that accompanied Winslow Homer Cross Currents at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City, the essay was titled "The Various Colors and Types of Negroes, Winslow Homer Learns to Paint Race." I focused on the artist's interest in color theory and the challenges that black skin presented to him and other artists who utilized texts like those written by French chemist Michel-Eugène Chevreul. Chevreul's book, The Laws of Contrast of Color, first published in 1839, was written with barely disguised white supremacist beliefs embedded in the approaches to color use that he advocated for artists. Homer called his 1860 edition of Chevreul his Bible and utilized it extensively. Chevreul's text offers just a handful of derisively worded paragraphs on the topic of painting non-white bodies, amongst the scores of pages that address pleasing color combinations and juxtapositions for painting white subjects. In that essay, I argue that Chevreul came up short in helping Homer to find effective chromatic solutions for painting his black subjects. And here I give you a comparison of Homer's work with some by his direct contemporary, the Catalan artist Josep Tapis. Homer had a lot of skills, but painting black skin in a convincing way isn't one of them. At least not until he chose black subjects from outside the context of the US South and focused instead on ones in the Caribbean. Color-wise, the paintings of black subjects like that found in the Gulf Stream look radically different due to the pervasive use of blues, greens, whites, colors that are mostly absent from the 1870s paintings like A Visit from Old Mistress, which is dominated by browns, reds, and various burnt ochres and earth tones. I have often thought I would like this painting more if the black woman's skin was painted better. if their bodies didn't look so much like the dirt floor upon which they stand that has become embedded in their raggedy clothes. While Homer is not creating a cartoonishly caricatured image of free black life here, neither is he showing black freedom as a move up from slavery, to borrow the title of Booker T. Washington's autobiography. Homer's depictions of black people at the end of the 19th century are that of being placed between a rock and a hard place, or between the devil and the deep blue sea. About a year ago, I was invited to give a talk about Homer's paintings of black subjects at the Portland Museum of Art. And as I began to prepare my PowerPoint, I did a basic Google search for, quote, Winslow Homer African American, to make sure I wasn't leaving out any images that I might want to discuss. Toggling over to the Images tab, this is what I saw. Lots of Homer paintings that were very familiar to me, and a few that were total surprises. Although surrounded by images of actual paintings by Homer, this painting is not by Homer, and neither is this. But why would anyone who has ever really looked at one of Homer's paintings think that they were? While they adapt the compositional strategies used by the artist, they make no sense as his. Or do they? Clicking through these faux black Homers led to eBay and other commercial sites where art reproductions are sold. These fake Homers point to fascinating issues of desire that contemporary viewers have around this particular artist. Desires that entrepreneurs believe cannot be satisfied solely by the paintings that the artist made during his career. These fake Homers, which are available for purchase as giclée prints on canvas from sellers with catchy names like Big Fit 2009 and Light Be Bright 82 and Crazy Felix 2, are anticipating searches from consumers seeking any number of things that correspond to Winslow Homer, black African American. Oh, let me maybe go back to that one. Yeah, you can see it up at the top, right? Winslow Homer, black African American fine art, watercolor painting, fine art, canvas print. Right? And when you look at these, I mean, you get a sense of Homer's style, not really being what's picked up on, but rather the aesthetics of the works themselves and kind of thematic elements within them, like the red flowers from this actual Homer here of a wall in Nassau, Bahamas, seem to kind of like populate the back of this print. These recombinative pictures are created by uploading both images and strings of text into AI bots that then sample visual tropes from their databases of Homer's and other artists' work to create something new. And while there are some odd similarities to Homer's actual works here, there are also the kind of ridiculous compositional fails that have been so characteristic of the abilities of AI image recombinators over the last couple of years, and and they're getting much better. So again, this is like so last year in a certain way. The things that I'm pointing out here, these machines are already taken care of. Just take a moment to look at the woman's hat in the image at left and the man's hand in the one at right. They make zero sense, at least until you begin to compare them to the sources from Homer that the AI program has used in their act of creation. Right, so you can see the woman's, this straw hat is coming right out of Prisoners from the front of that figure, to the side. So the computer is borrowing things, it's trying to, to work with them. So similarly, this image, advertised as Winslow Homer African American Picnic, reveals its origins as machine data in the dead eye sockets of the woman, second from the left, the awkwardly squashed hat, and the bodiless foot that seems to appear at lower left. But for me, the ultimate tell is that these black folks are far too well dressed and too middle class to be one of Homer's black subjects. The rapid advances in artificial intelligence, now available for free to everyone on their own personal devices, are enabling creations of scenes of Black life that Homer never envisioned. Those who seek to capitalize on these images are using the artist's name to make their fortune, or if not a fortune exactly, a little easy money, and most importantly, to fill an unmet demand in the market for positive, historical representations of Black people. My own interest in Homer began in the late 1990s, when during my fourth year in the PhD program at Stanford University, I took a seminar with the art historian Sarah Burns that was solely dedicated to the work of Homer. Together, we read books and articles about Homer's illustrations, watercolor drawings, and paintings. It was both exciting and fascinating to dig into an artist's work in this way, and it was one of the formative experiences of my graduate career. I had chosen to focus on the history of African American art, both images of Black people and objects made by Black people. So I vividly remember my first encounter with Mary Ann Calo's 1980 essay in the American Art Journal titled Winslow Homer's Visits to Virginia During Reconstruction, in which she creates a rich historical context for the images of formerly enslaved subjects that Homer made in the 1870s. I was also excited to read Winslow Homer's Images of Blacks, the Civil War and Reconstruction Years by Karen C.C. Dalton and Peter H. Wood, a remarkable catalog to an exhibition that began at the Menil Foundation in Houston, where Dalton served as the director of the Image of the Black and Western Art Archive. After absorbing these two projects, I was impressed by the work that these white scholars had done on Homer's images of African American subjects. Both projects sought to provide a historical context for the work and argue that Homer's approach to Black representation, that his approach was emotionally sympathetic to Black lives. But I was also sad and disappointed. It seemed to me that Homer had chosen to only represent Black people as disenfranchised, desperately poor, formerly enslaved people with skin that looked like dirt. And I felt that these scholars failed to consider what that approach might have meant for the reception of his work by unintended viewers like myself, who were not only African American, as I am, but who knew that Black life in the 19th century was not just about slavery and its legacies. As someone born in Boston, like Homer, and who grew up in Cambridge, like Homer, I have been a fan of his for years. I owned a cheap poster reproduction of his 1899 masterpiece, The Gulf Stream, that I bought at the Harvard Coop as a teenager. It was the only image of a Black person that I could find in the stack of posters that they have for sale. I remember tacking it up on my bedroom wall and staring at it, puzzled as to why that man in the fishing boat didn't take some initiative and fashion a new sail out of the tattered one, right? He's got that sugar cane on deck. He could have done something. Couldn't he make himself a new rudder with the mast and get the hell out of there before the storm came? But as a graduate student, I couldn't understand why senior colleagues were so enamored with finding recuperative value in paintings of Homer's like this one. Uncle Ned, painted by Homer in 1875, depicts an elderly Black man and a Black youth tending to a barnyard of animals as three children, who most critics assume to be white, perch atop a board to peer into a pigsty that lies beneath a dovecote. During its first display in New York City at the Century Association in January 1874, Homer titled the painting The Dovecote, before changing it to Uncle Ned at Home when he exhibited at the National Academy of Design the following year. The title, Uncle Ned at Home, invokes the main character from a hugely popular 1848 minstrel song by Stephen C. Foster, Old Uncle Ned, about an elderly enslaved man whose death is mourned by his former enslavers. Homer was relying on his audience's familiarity with the song to create the narrative for the scene. And if you're not familiar with Old Uncle Ned, you probably, know other songs by him, like Oh Susanna or Camptown Races. Today, Foster's music is rarely performed, but some songs like My Old Kentucky Home the official song of the state of Kentucky, are still very much a part of American life. If you watch the Kentucky Derby, they sing this at the beginning of the Kentucky Derby, and it's like 100,000 people singing My Old Kentucky Home, which is, you know, this minstrel song about slaves missing home. Old Uncle Ned is not an easy song to reckon with, and even though I'm placing these redacted lyrics on the screen for you to read, I'm not going to give voice to them, but I'd like you to recite them in your mind as Homer's audience would have while looking at his painting. For the next 50 years, between its making in 1874 and the turn of the new century, the painting was exhibited in New York City and Chicago under a variety of titles, including Happy Family, Uncle Ned's Happy Family, and A Happy Family in Virginia. Homer's decision to encourage his audience to identify the central figure in his painting as Uncle Ned is indicative, I argue, of his indifference to the potential for it to perpetuate negative and oppressive stereotypes that might affect the lives of actual Black people. And this is an issue that continues to trouble scholars who think and write about Homer and the legacy of these paintings. Back in 2020, when Uncle Ned was on view at the Portland Museum of Art in Maine, then curator of American art Diana Greenwald was joined by Dana Bird, a historian of American art at Bowdoin College, and part of the curatorial team behind the phenomenal 2018 exhibition Winslow Homer and the Camera. They engaged in a fascinating online conversation that reveals that revealed both scholars' complex feelings about the painting. And I encourage you, it's a 12-minute conversation, I encourage you to listen to it online because it's really, it's a great conversation. And Bird expresses this ambivalence about the painting, you know, despite the fact that she's somebody who has done major work on Homer. More typically, scholars find ways to explain and excuse Homer's choices. In Winslow Homer American Passage, which was published about 2 years ago, biographer William R. Cross invokes the words of Frederick Douglass to contextualize Homer's decision. And this is Douglass. "The poets are with us," Douglass wrote toward the end of his epic autobiography, My Bondage and Freedom. "It would seem almost absurd to say it, considering the use that has been made of them, that we have allies in the Ethiopian songs, those songs that constitute our national music, and without which we have no national music. They are heart songs, and the finest feelings of human nature are expressed in them. Lucy Neal, Old Kentucky Home, and Uncle Ned can make the heart sad as well as merry, and call forth a tear as well as a smile. They awaken the sympathies for the slave in which anti-slavery principles take root, grow, and flourish," close quote. And so this quote has been taken by Cross as a way to justify the title. In his eagerness to excuse Homer's choice to associate his painting with the culture of blackface minstrelsy, Cross ignores the 20-year gap between Douglass's sentiment and Homer's choice to reference a heart song within a painting title. Douglass was writing in a moment in which slavery was still legal and was practiced widely in the United States. A moment in which vast numbers of white men in blackface toured the country, performing a mix of sad songs meant to evoke pity for the enslaved and bawdy, derisive comic tunes that mocked and degraded those same people and questioned their humanity. Homer made his painting 10 years after slavery had been abolished, when blackface minstrelsy was more popular than ever. In fact, the form survived and would flourish for another 70 years until it began to disappear in the early 1940s, when television and movies displaced vaudeville and other forms of lowbrow theater from the entertainment diets of most Americans. By falling back on Uncle Ned, Homer perpetuated a set of romanticized racist ideals that by seeming to humanize enslaved people and relate narratives of benevolent affection held by enslavers toward their human property, that these perpetuated the nostalgia for a positive narrative of enslavement that was still held by much of the artist's upper middle class northern white audience. Uncle Ned signals the possibility of a return to the antebellum past, when Black folks' whole lives were spent laboring in and around a home that would never truly be their own. None of Homer's pictures were meant with me or any other Black viewers in mind. His intended audience was always upper middle class and wealthy white Northerners. But in the intervening 150 years, our audiences have changed. And now we must think about work like Homer's from multiple perspectives. And dialogues around art must expand outward, and the feelings of those who encounter the work in ways that are unexpected must be engaged and honored. And so now I want to shift this discussion to think about the problems that I have, from the problems that I have with Homer's paintings, which I think I've outlined for you, to the scholarly and curatorial challenges that the scarcity of visually satisfying fine art representations of Black Americans have on our understanding of the Black presence in the past. In fits and starts since the 1970s, Black Americans have been trying to address the desires, American museums, In fits and starts since the 1970s, American museums have been trying to address the desires of their expanded audiences, Black and non-Black, who want to see more representational diversity of artists and subjects when they visit, by purchasing, borrowing, or relocating representations of Black people and portraits of Black sitters, both named and unknown, from storage to more visible places in their permanent collections. Because of these efforts to increase African American representation in historically white museum spaces, there has been a dwindling number of appropriate objects on the market. And in line with laws of supply and demand, an increasing number of blacked up imposters and imaginary ancestors have begun to appear on the market and on the walls of respected institutions. My own involvement with this trend began back in 2005 when I was organizing Portraits of the People, picturing African Americans in the 19th century. My first exhibition, which I did for the Addison Gallery of American Art, and it was my first time really working focused on African American portraits. When I initially saw the portrait of Charles Jones, the would-be son of Absalom Jones, the first African American to become an ordained Episcopal priest, it was in the form of an advertisement for a commercial art gallery. The full-color ad, which had been torn from an Arts and Antiques magazine, was pressed into my hand by Marilyn Richardson, a historian of African American literature and art based in the Boston area. I remember looking down at the glossy page and seeing a gilt-framed painted portrait of a young brown-skinned man. According to the ad, this 19th century portrait was being offered for sale by a dealer in nearby Newport, Rhode Island. "I know you're curating a Black portraiture exhibition," Marilyn said to me with a smile. "I thought you might find this interesting." Indeed, I did. At that moment, I was working hard to identify and locate portraits of named Black subjects to include in this exhibition. My original inspiration for the show was sparked by the late Guy C. McElroy's groundbreaking exhibition, Facing History, the Black Image in American Art, 1710 to 1940, which had been mounted by the Corcoran Gallery in 1990. My mother gave me this catalog as a graduation present in '91. I saw portraits of the people as both an homage and an extension of McElroy's project. Whereas Facing History had included many objects and images of Black figures or unnamed individuals, Portraits of the People would define itself, I felt, through an organizing structure of known sitters, enhanced with biographical information on both the subject and the maker, paying special attention to the ways that sitters and artists often cross the color line. Each of the portraits in the exhibition would be of somebody who was known and named, or at the very least, had once been a knowable sitter. I was purposely excluding generic types to focus more clearly upon the ways that freed and freeborn African Americans had used portraiture commissions to help construct personal and public images of themselves and their families. In 2003, I began assembling my checklist by selecting the most impressive portraits that had been exhibited in Facing History, along with examples found while exploring the holdings of the Image of the Black of Western Art archive at Harvard, where I was then teaching. I moved out from there, visiting archives, libraries, and museums, relying upon recommendations and tips from colleagues to find interesting and relevant portraits. This was hard but satisfying work, and at one moment, I thought I had discovered 2 18th century portraits of African-descended individuals in a house museum on the island of Bermuda, only to realize, when examining them under bright lights, that they weren't black sitters, they were just dirty old paintings of white people. So I wasted no time in bringing Charles Jones to the attention of my colleagues at the Addison Gallery. The curatorial team shared my excitement over the painting, which bore the signature of Ethan Allen Greenwood, a vernacular painter from Massachusetts who was active in the early 19th century. The Addison reached out to the gallery, who was offering it, and a couple of weeks later, there was an alumni connection there apparently, a couple of weeks later, we were standing in gallery storage, examining it together, discussing its condition, including the uneven nature of the cleaning job that somebody had undertaken on it, the gray undertones of the sitter's face, and the awkwardness of his shirt buttons. And it turned out that the dealer had generously offered to give the painting to the gallery. We were so excited by the portrait and the fortuitous way that it had arrived in our presence, hello, free, right? That we decided to put it on the cover of the exhibition catalog. And I remember saying, this painting is so great, it's just too good to be true. As I learned a few years later, indeed it was. In 2006, while Portraits of People was on tour and installed at the Delaware Art Museum, I began to suspect that there might not be something right with my friend Chuck, that he might be an imaginary ancestor who didn't exist. One day, a historian at the African Episcopal Church of St. Thomas in Philadelphia, where Absalom Jones had been the founding minister, the historian called my office at Penn, where I was now teaching, with questions about the painting. He was primarily interested in learning what I knew about the sitter's identity and what archival sources had been found to confirm it. There were no records of Absalom Jones having had any children, he said. I told him that the identity of the sitter had come with the painting, and unfortunately, it clearly must be wrong. I was appalled at my initial excitement about the painting. I had just trusted the dealer's research, and had failed to confirm the simple genealogical fact. I immediately examined a list of paintings by Ethan Allen Greenwood, published by the American Antiquarian Society in 1946. And I quickly saw that out of the dozens of portraits made by the artist in 1815, which was the date on the painting, none of them were of men named Jones, nor had any been made any further south than Rhode Island, making it unlikely that the artist would have encountered the Absalom Jones family in Philadelphia. So who was the man in this painting, and why had we been told that it was Charles Jones, the non-existent son of Absalom Jones? Just a few weeks later, I had my answers. When a curator from a major art museum that shall remain anonymous, which had purchased the very same painting a few years prior, shared an internal file with me that they assembled when the painting had been examined in their state-of-the-art conservation laboratory. The Addison Gallery sadly had no conservation facilities and had not sent the painting out for analysis. This museum's well-equipped lab had conducted an extensive examination of the painting, including making the X-ray you see here, which had revealed an entirely different face beneath the one that had been painted onto its surface. The face of the original sitter had been damaged at some point, and an enterprising individual had decided to rework the canvas by repainting the face and inventing an identity for the newly blacked up imposter. When this museum had discovered the true condition of the painting, rather than destroying it, and it only cost them $5,000, okay? So rather than destroying it or exiling it to their storage vaults, they had returned it to the seller, who had in turn resold it to someone else. And it had very quickly made its way to the dealer in Newport and then onto the Addison, which had no inkling that it might be anything other than what it was pretending to be. And as I sat there holding this evidence in my hand, I wanted to cry, and hello, I still want to cry today. Could I have been any more naive? This painting had been upcycled, to pander to the emerging trend of acquiring early images of black subjects. Not only was Charles Jones a fake identity that had been manufactured to create interest in a painting of an anonymous black man, but Blackness itself was being used as a tool to add value to the otherwise unremarkable portrait of a long-dead white man. My colleagues at Addison were simply mortified. Citing condition issues, the painting was removed from the exhibition's tour and placed in storage. But our blacked-up imposter remains on the cover of my catalog. And every time I look at this book, my heart sinks. You know, I guess the only bonus here is that used copies now sell for almost $300. I have plenty, if anybody would like. Although devastated by these developments, I had learned a tremendous amount from the experience, and I think this is something that happens with art historians. Some things you have to learn, you know, along the way. I learned a tremendous amount from the experience. The file on the painting that I received from my curator colleague had also included information on another painting that was blacked up of an imaginary ancestor that had been offered to the same institution. And one of the things that had flagged this second painting as a fake was the purported biography of its sitter linked it to the imaginary Charles Jones and cited portraits of the people as part of its bona fides. Then, just a few months later, I read an article in the New Yorker magazine about the revelatory cleaning of the Black Admiral, a privately owned painting of an African-American sailor that had been painted over in a similar way to hide the face of a white sitter. There was, it appeared, a very active and organized effort to manufacture, market, and sell fraudulent portraits of blacked-up imposters to gullible museums seeking to exhibit imaginary ancestors. Now, I'm not saying that this is a fake, but this market remains quite hot. This was purchased recently by a museum, and I had questions about it. I just thought it was such a strange little portrait. And every time I hear about a 19th century portrait of an unnamed black sitter that has emerged from obscurity, I can't help but be skeptical that another blacked-up imposter has been manufactured to distort our understanding of the black presence in historical American visual culture. For example, this strange painting 2 years ago feels wrong. With the impending semi-quincentennial, the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence coming upon us in 2026, now is a critical moment to engage entrenched myths of early black history and representation of British colonial 19th century American art and culture. Not only must we reconsider the familiar narratives around early black makers and thinkers who worked to innovate within complex traditions and under challenging circumstances, but art historians and curators must also seek fresh paths through long-standing professional ambivalence regarding the presence and legacy of slavery in American art. Only by fording this territory will space be made for more detailed and potentially recuperative understandings of our material past. It is crucial to explore new routes if we are to locate not only the imaginary ancestors and the blacked-up imposters, but also begin to recover the identities and life experiences of the many purposely forgotten and misremembered African-American makers and subjects who have always been present even when they were not seen. So I want to close this talk with a few musings, beginning with this final example, this is the final example, beginning with this example of a bronze memorial to songwriter Stephen Foster, made in 1900 by Italian-American sculptor Giuseppe Moretti, which depicts an elderly black slave strumming a banjo as Foster, seated above him, writes the lyrics to Old Uncle Ned on a piece of parchment. It was removed from its pedestal at the University of Pittsburgh in 2018. For over the years, the sculpture, which had stood opposite the university's Stephen Collins Foster Memorial Museum and Theater since 1944, had been vandalized numerous times, and so finally it was removed from public view. But the Foster Museum remains open to visitors by appointment. You can take a guided tour for just $5. And performances are still mounted in the Foster Theater. This son of Pittsburgh, which is where Foster was born, is still remembered and celebrated in his hometown, even if this memorial sculpture is no longer on view. But I would argue that by losing access to Moretti's grotesque artistic celebration of Foster's thoroughly vile creative contribution to American music, we lose some understanding of the widely insidious nature of Foster's art, the damage that it did and is still doing in American culture. If contextualization, relocation, or total removal of difficult works of public sculpture are the current answers to the problem of offensive memorialization of racist cultural ideas like Moretti's monument, what do we do with the images, like those made by Homer, that are not public art, but instead hang on the walls of private homes and inside museums? For some of us, looking at a painting whose title invokes a sorrow song about enslavers who have lost such a great worker is frankly not super appealing. I hope I have expressed at some point in this talk that I believe Winslow Homer to be one of the most consequential artists of the 19th century. And yet, as this presentation has also probably revealed, I do not love most of his images of Black people. I find them very challenging and often very depressing. But I always find them interesting and 100% worth thinking about. This is why I am tempted to see the invitation to rememorate our own fantasies and explore alternative pasts that AI bots like ChatGPT and DALL-E afford art customers and consumers, giving us the tools with which to create our own historical fantasies as strange antidotes to the problems of Black representation that are present in 19th century American art. I believe that people who love Black people want to see historical images of Black prosperity and Black joy on their Instagram feeds, in the museums they visit, and in the reproductions on their walls, not ones that remind them of the hardship and suffering endured by our ancestors during and after enslavement. And if we cannot find real historical ones, or have the skills to paint fakes of our own, well, now we have the tools to write them into being. Black scholars of African American art history, like me, must constantly question the future of 19th century American art, considering our own and our community's contemporary desires to see more Blackness, especially when that Black presence is a false one. We must ask, what are images like this doing to us? What desires do they tap into? But we must also try to keep our own paranoia at bay. I say this because a simple reverse image search of Black couple on Michigan Avenue reveals that this is a real photograph, and located in the photographs of miscellaneous assignments by Documerica photographers between 1972 and 77. It is a part of the National Archives. Imani was just overreacting. It's a travel through digitization that led to its visual degradation, and convinced my colleague that it had been generated by AI. But it hadn't. It was real, even though it felt like it should be a fantasy. This summer, Kara Walker unveiled a new commission project at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art titled Fortuna and the Immortality Garden Machine, a respite for the weary time traveler, featuring a rite of ancient intelligence carried out by the gardeners toward the continued improvement of the human species by Kara E. Walker, like E. Walker. Her middle name is Elizabeth E., so it's recombing. It explores the way that trauma becomes embedded within our society, how technology can be used to perpetuate that trauma, and if our country has the power and will to move beyond those histories, or if our future is already always being written for us, like fortunes spilling from the mouth of an automaton. At an old sideshow carnival, Walker's largest robotic automaton in the exhibition, Fortuna herself, responds to visitors in the gallery with a programmed gesture as a newly printed fortune falls from her mouth. And there are 100+ fortunes. They include, quote, "The paradox of being Black is the condition of not being. Your last shred of dignity is often your best. Loss is a heady thing our hearts cannot comprehend." All were written by Walker. But in an interview with the New York Times, she admitted that at first, she tried to have ChatGPT generate them. She fed it prompts that included keywords like Afro-pessimism and liberation struggles. But she found the results unsatisfying, soulless, and trite. As an artist, Walker needed to control and produce her own meaning. But not all of us have those skills. Some of us need a little help from a machine to create a rememory of the past. Thank you. I realize that was a little long, but I'm happy to take your questions if you have them, and run it for the next. Yes.
Yeah, I found this really interesting because of some of the other stuff I've seen. I was wondering if you've noticed any of the similar trends with African American music, or like hip hop and AI, to create things that might, yeah, that's just my question.
Hip hop and AI. I'm really old now. I'm not listening to as much hip hop as I once did. I used to teach a class called African American Popular Culture. I did that for about 2 years after I got out of graduate school. And then I was like, oh, I could not keep up. I think that there's I'm constantly, whenever I do hear some hip hop, I'm always thinking, is this a white voice or a black voice? And trying to figure out where the experience is coming from. And that's something that is, will always kind of stay with me, in part because my mother never let me listen to Elvis Presley or the Rolling Stones, because she thought they were just like awful in so many ways. I still get a little nervous and look around, like, if I'm listening to the Stones or something. Don't do that often. And so, I think that kind of that kind of masquerade is one thing, but I don't know about AI and hip hop, so I'm not going to pretend. Do you have something in mind with that? Was there
So much of what you were talking about, I've run into some mixes of music and art, like paintings of African Americans from the 70s. And at first I thought they were real, and I thought, whoa, such lovely people. Then when I looked, I saw that it was all generated by AI. The music also. And then I started to think, what is this trying to do? And
well, actually, with AI and they created this hip hop persona that was like an AI generated character, right? Who was like white and black. It's just weird. Yeah, I think we're entering this whole era, kind of deep fakery. That I was watching on my Instagram feed a conversation between Diddy and Donald Trump for like a couple minutes, and I'm like, this is AI. Like, I figured after a little while, it was just like, this is AI. And I was like, okay, I'll never get back those 3 minutes. So it's a massive time waste. Over in the back here.
Thank you so much. That was really wonderful. I'm also really interested in artificial intelligence and art history. And something that really struck me in your presentation was this idea of using AI as a tool for reimagining. But AI languages are they rely on the databases that already exist, right? So
Yeah.
they're looking at artworks that are already digitized and available, and thinking about what those artworks are, right? Does that feature in your research? And it does. Could you speak a little bit more to that?
Yeah, right, so they're drawing on all of these sources and all of this, this material, and Homer's outside of copyright. So Homer's fair game to be processed by these systems. And, you know, but these companies, these AI companies, are now purchasing the rights, like Taylor and Francis, which publishes almost every single scholarly journal that I've ever published in, is now, sold all of that to, like, I don't know, ChatGPT or something like that. And so they can now draw on my research. And I'm not getting paid for it. I get paid for it to start with, because scholarly publishing is not a way to make any money. But as these deals get struck, because there's that money there, and they can legally acquire the data, the information, the scholarship, the images as collections, as artists' estates, decide to go for the easy money, all of this just gets better every single second. It gets more convincing. Maybe I shouldn't say better, but it gets better at what it's doing. It gets more convincing. And the questions about the diversity of the data, right? That there is often not, like with facial recognition systems that aren't trained on black faces, that kind of thing. I've been thinking a lot about those elements, and as soon as I write something, then it all changes, and I have to start over again. So it's hard to know when to stop that writing, because I think it's important historically for people to write and stop, and so that we know what people were thinking at that moment in the development. But it's really hard to kind of like get it out of your hands. And to find the actual information that you need about what's going on, I think is challenging. My cousin is a scaler. He does the scaffolding for the Internet Archive in San Francisco, and is responsible for making all of that stuff actually like sit there. And so I always get my tips from him. I'm like, Sam, help me out. But it's hard. It's really hard because it goes so fast, and it's getting so much better every minute at hiding itself. Over here.
Hi. So you did kind of just say something about the black facial recognition, but something that I have noticed from using like filters or stuff, and trying filters and stuff out, especially nowadays where a lot of them aren't as silly and their purpose more is to make you more beautiful and change your features and stuff like that.
Nothing could make you more beautiful, sister.
Thank you. And so with filters, and then too, I don't know, was it last year or the beginning of this year, some app or something that everybody kind of figured out, you could like plug in pictures of yourself or whatever, and like however many pictures of yourself, and then it would give you a list of different photos that AI generated of yourself in different contexts and all different things. It's something that I noticed a lot with other African Americans, other black people, was that they often had issues, with getting the shapes of noses right and things like that. But then I too, even then, so I didn't do that, but I did like trying filters, and it always makes my skin tone lighter, makes my nose smaller, and it honestly whitens my features, to be quite honest. And so I was kind of curious if you were going to cover that at all in what you said. So I was just interested in what you have to say about that as well too.
I love AI headshots. I have a massive stash of AI headshots that I've done where I've fed in different pictures of myself and my hair. This is my gray hair. But some of those pictures that I fed in didn't have gray hair. Some of them had my hair straight. Some of it had it curly. And the crazy things that it did with my hair and with the salt and pepper, like it did not know what to do. But the thing that it really didn't know what to do with was my freckles. All those pictures came out, I didn't have any freckles. It could not understand freckles. It couldn't deal with, this errant melanin, right? That was interesting, but also it did. It changed the shape of my nose, the shape of my chin. I put my age in. We wanted to know what decade, right? So I put in 50s. So all of a sudden I had a chicken neck. I don't have a chicken neck. I think I'm doing okay. And nothing. Listen, I embrace aging. It's a beautiful thing. But it wasn't my neck, right? It wasn't my neck. And I did feel like I looked less like myself. I tried to use those, the best of those AI headshots, because then I took more pictures and I got better at it. And, and I just I took pictures that day and put them in and had them produced, and they turned out really good. And I thought, yeah, that's kind of me, like that's me. It's working with me, so it is kind of me. And when I was appointed to the gallery on campus, the Penn News wanted to do a story. They said, send over headshots. I sent over the headshots, and they said, whose credit line do we give? Who took that amazing photograph of you, Gwendolyn? And I'm like, well, I did. And they're like, well, what credit line? Well, I said, well, it was like AI, but it was from my photographs of me. And they're like, well, we can't do that. I said, but my research right now is on AI, so this is like my research. And they weren't having it. So they had me take those pictures, and now I'm like, oh, but like my bingo wings, Like you can always find these problems with real pictures or without, but it's true. I think there are a lot of aspects of identity that make us feel like us that the computer does not recognize as being an essential part of your identity. Like the freckles are an essential part of my mixedness that, really communicate who I am, I think, and where my genes come from. And it doesn't know what to do with them yet. Thank you. Thanks. Okay. Well, I want to thank you all for sticking it out. Thanks for coming.